Hi everyone, this is Sheila Shaffie and welcome back to another episode by ProcessArc. There is a new buzzword out there, wide data. So before the information clutter gets too big, let's get ahead of the curve, talk about what it is and how it's different from big data. Now, if you like topics around creative problem solving, innovation, and critical thinking, I would be grateful if you subscribed. Now let's go to the topic at hand. Now on May 19th of this year, Gartner put out a report titled, Gartner says 70% of organizations will shift their focus from big to small and wide data by 2025. So what exactly is wide data and how is it different from big data? So let's go back to big data for a second because I think we need that context in order to figure out how these two ideas are so different and why this shift is taking place. So big data by its name is referring to an unimaginable amount of data that's getting generated and stored by companies. Now, if you think about that on a daily basis, a cell phone user is generating 40 exabytes of data through the phone usage, emails, texts, photos, music selections that they have, and you multiply that by the number of cell phone users that are out there, you can imagine the sheer amount of data that's being generated on a day-to-day basis. Now, the majority of the technology and the conversation that's been happening around big data had more to do with how to leverage technology and tools to actually grab the data and store it in a place. And it had less to do with gleaning insights and information about it. And in order for it to have been considered big data, it had to meet 5 specific criteria. It had to have volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value. And so if we think about each one of those items in terms of criteria for it to have been counted as big data, volume had to do with just the sheer number of data points that we could collect about a customer. So think about the banking sector, the number of transactions that happen day to day for each client and between financial institutions. So that's just volume. Velocity had to do with the speed of that data being generated. So financial transactions are happening every second at a very large amount. So that's velocity. Variety had to do with the idea of whether data was structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. So think about data either being compiled in Excel, which is an example of structured, all the way to voice being recorded in call centers or texts being entered next to customer accounts that would track certain information about them. And that would be the end of the spectrum, meaning unstructured data. In terms of veracity, we're just talking about accuracy and trustworthiness. In essence, if we can't trust the data, there's no point in even compiling and storing it somewhere. And ultimately, the last criteria for it to have been considered big data was value, meaning that if we were actually going to compile all this information, could we do better in terms of cost reduction or being able to develop new products and services for the customer, or becoming better advocates for them in that they could become healthier financially. So that was big data. Now, wide data is different because its entire focus is on finding relationships or correlation between data, whether that data is being generated inside your company or data that exists outside your organization. And inherently what it's trying to do, because most companies are set up in silos and hence the data that they're generating and compiling is set up in silos, it's trying to break all of those walls down so that you can collect information across the organization and again from outside the organization, all with the intent of trying to find relationships. Its entire interest and the insights that it can generate through statistical modeling has to do with how data intersects with one another to give you insights. So here's a crude example. Can a bank use the housing start numbers that get published month by month to predict the mortgage volume applications that they're going to get? That's an example of taking historical data that you may have had about your customers and the mortgages that you have issued, and comparing and contrasting them with housing start numbers that get published by the industry. Or here's another example of trying to predict auto loan volumes. You may be able to collect some information about your existing customers, like their age, the loan amount, the terms, the type of vehicle they purchase, the duration of the loans. That could be information that you have internally, and then you compile information external to your organization around interest rates, the number of models being issued by the manufacturers of automobiles, the price ranges that are being offered, unemployment rate, expected GDP growth rate. All this information that is outside of your organization can be essentially tabulated, compiled, and statistical models can be then leveraged to then begin to predict potential relationships or outcomes. And that's the end story of wide data. Practically, what I'm describing to you is that for as long as statistics has existed, the notion of wide data has also existed, because statistical modeling, regression modeling, has always been around using whatever data was available to define relationships and correlations so that you could predict the outcome you wanted. So the one challenge that's going to persist is actually for the executives and the leadership of organizations, because now they have to come up with the perspective, the thinking, and ultimately the questions to which data scientists and statisticians are going to use the notion of wide data to find answers for. There's certainly a lot of data out there. We've certainly been collecting a ton of data over time. Mind you, it may be sitting in silos in different databases. But the point is, even if we were to consolidate all of this information into one place, turned all the unstructured data into structured data or semi-structured data, turned the data essentially into something that could be used, the one thing that's going to persist is the questions that the executives need to ask of themselves and of their data analytics team in order to come up with the answers they're looking for to drive growth and improved customer experience. So that's it, guys. Wide data explained. If you have any questions or thoughts, please leave them down below. I would love to hear them. It is a new term, but certainly not a new concept to you guys who are out there practicing statistics or are engineers doing modeling day in and day out. I'm so grateful you came to join me today. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.